Yeah, this is
I hope I'm audible. Okay. Um, Let me first of all congratulate and express my deep sense of appreciation for Ambarish ji and his team in the RTE Forum for ensuring that in spite of the physical lockdown that we are all subjected to at the moment, there is no intellectual and emotional lockdown. We are we have been given a platform in which to express ourselves, and as citizens, we don't stop being citizens just because there is a physical lockdown. And
yeah.
and I think I really congratulate RTE Forum for creating such a platform, and I hope that this is, as you said, the first in a series of similar interactions, similar dialogic process. And I also hope that the interactions would be more in terms of reflections and bringing in their own the individual experiences of all participants, and not by way of just question and answers. And it will be great if the technology allows us to document some of these interactions into dialogues, so we can someday bring out a publication called Dialogues Under Lockdown or something like that. Let me first of all again congratulate RTE Forum for this initiative. Forgive me for my appearance. I'm on a lockdown appearance, as you can see. So that is in a way a background to whatever I'm going to speak about here. I'm most grateful to Ambarish ji for persuading me to participate in this webinar. This required me to come out of my comfort zone as a practitioner of institutional development and renewal in higher education. And it forced me to collect my amorphous and half-hearted, half-formed thoughts about school education and the prospects it may have in the post-COVID India. I propose to share with you some of my thoughts on the changed realities that public schools may find themselves in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic crisis and the consequent lockdown. My thoughts are based on the authentic experiences shared so readily with me with such kindness and sensitivity by three of my close friends, Mr. Firoz Ahmed, Dr. Manoj Chahil, and Mr. Gaurav Sharma, who are very distinguished and much respected teachers in the public school systems in Delhi. I have also been benefited from the discussions I've had with Dr. Geeta Menon and Dr. Gunjan Sharma. I put forward a caveat right at the outset. COVID-19 pandemic drama has just about begun in India. From all accounts, even its first act has not reached its climax. There are many scenarios that epidemiologists, economists, and social scientists are describing, some of which are quite pessimistic, while some others demonstrate cautious optimism. However, these are early days, and one never knows how things will pan out. We may not be able to predict as yet how many cases of COVID-19 India will eventually have and what our mortality figures are likely to be. Whatever may be the epidemiological impact, we are assured of one thing by all the experts. We are moving towards a major economic crisis that some people liken to the Great Depression of the 1929 to 1933. From what we have witnessed so far in this pandemic drama, it is very clear that the disease, as well as the preventive measures against it, like the present lockdown, have both been impacting the poor segments of our population much more severely than others. These have disrupted both lives and livelihoods of the poor and the marginalized. The living conditions of the poor that were unstable even prior to this crisis have now been rendered.
The plight of the migrant workers are etched deeply on our consciousness in the form of televised images of their long walks towards their homes, and the brutality and insensitivity that were meted out to them all along their long journey. What, however, does not come across to us equally dramatically is how the lockdown has shaken the fragile foundations of the lives of such people around us as barbers, cobblers, tailors, small house shopkeepers, household workers, taxi drivers, car washers, dhobis, dhabawalas, electricians, plumbers, and people belonging to hundreds of other categories who live hand to mouth on the very fringes of our economy. Even when the pandemic eventually eases to grip on us, even when the pandemic eventually eases its grip on us, the economy, particularly the informal sectors, are not likely to return to its original state. The system has been stretched beyond its elastic limits, and there is perhaps no getting back to where we were. In Delhi, particularly, the timing of the pandemic could not have been more inopportune. We had witnessed a major communal violence just a few weeks before the lockdown. There was hardly any time for processing this collective trauma, leave alone starting the process of healing. People were still in the relief camp at Eidgah in Mustafabad, and they had to be evacuated in time for the enforcement of the lockdown. What has happened to these families who have lost their dear ones, their homes, and their livelihoods? We don't know very much about them. Even those of us who have time and again been tested positive for this disease, this other disease called naive optimism, had predicted that the communal forces would find a way of deriving mileage even out of a crisis that affects equally all members of the human species. Sure enough, it happened this time as well, and many mainstream TV channels and social media were full of shrill exclamations about Corona Jihad. I say all these things as a background against which we must look at the state of public school system in Delhi and what may be in store for them. I'm deliberately not going to talk about the private schools, except this brief remark on the likely plight of the EWS students there. With the private schools competing with each other in going gaga over technology solutions like online education, video conferencing, and so on, one wonders how the EWS children may be faring. Inadequate access to technology.
Education. Bombay.
Can I continue? Please, may I continue? Inadequate access to technology becomes an additional dimension to their overall experience of deprivation and marginalization. Let me leave this topic here. This could well be a topic for another subject for another webinar. Let us now look more closely at the MCD and the schools run by MCD schools and the schools run by the Department of Education, Government of Delhi. The children in these schools are from the families of the very categories of people on the margins that I mentioned earlier. The specific socio-economic profiles of students may vary across schools from location to location, but by and large, they are from families that are dependent on livelihoods in the informal sectors. As a teacher in a government school told me, the relatively better off in his class are a couple of students whose parents are class 4 employees in the government. Almost all others come from families whose livelihoods are much more precarious and unstable. A segment of students are children of migrant workers. Several of the children, particularly girls, put in considerable amount of before coming to school. They put in considerable amount of domestic work before coming to school, and some of them, after school hours, go to the kotis to assist their mothers as domestic workers in middle-class families. Almost all children are critically dependent on midday meals provided at school. Disruption in the lives of these families on the margins has been to such an extent that it is quite likely to manifest starkly in the life at school during the lockdown and beyond. the government has given a somewhat vague direction to teachers to stay engaged, stay connected with students through social media. Some teachers are sporadically attempting to form WhatsApp groups, and some others trying to reach out through phone calls. However, only about 1/3 of students have registered in these WhatsApp groups, and even among them, only very few have responded to communications from teachers. The technological solutions to reach out to students are clearly quite ineffective by all accounts. Teachers suspect that some of their students may have got dislocated and may not even be able to access communication of any kind. The kind of trauma that the children may be going through may be such that would make it quite unrealistic for us to expect any kind of focus or concentration on their studies. Those teachers who have been in touch with some of their students say how reticent the children have been generally in talking about their difficult situations. A large number of children in public schools in the communal violence affected areas of Delhi are from families that have got dislocated and completely disrupted. It is doubtful whether many of such children will be able to re-access their disrupted education even after the schools reopen. The lives of children in the margins are completely disrupted at present. This makes the continued participation of their children in school that much more uncertain and problematic. When the schools reopen, we are likely to witness the following. It is quite likely that there may be some reduction in numbers for new admissions in 2020-21 into classes 1 as well as to class 6. It is quite likely that there may be unusually low attendance across classes. It is also quite possible that we may witness high rates of dropout, particularly beyond class 5 or class 8. By all accounts, the dropout rates may be higher among girl children. Children, particularly girls, may be called upon increasingly to attend to domestic chores and assist their mothers in their livelihoods outside home. And boys in their teens may be sent into the wage labor market. It is quite likely that there will be a certain extent of regression in the familial support for children's education, particularly beyond class 5 or class 8. On the other hand, there is a possibility of a reverse exodus from the private to government schools as well. Those families who have been sending their children, particularly boys, to affordable, quote unquote, affordable private schools are likely to put them back in government schools, since they will no longer be able to afford the private costs towards their children's education. As one can well imagine, social distancing will be difficult to observe in schools, however much one tries. Children, by their very nature, huddle and cuddle among themselves. Children need sports and games, and touch is an important aspect of most of these activities. All this would be a lot difficult to negotiate with once the schools reopen. One hears about shift systems and other means of decongesting of schools that are being considered. But it remains to be seen as to how effective these measures are likely to be. Social distancing between teachers and students has always been there in public schools, particularly where there is a major class difference between teachers and students. This has, in some sense, been a problem even prior to the crisis in providing an emotional, congenial environment of nurturance and support at school. With the present pandemic and the stigma now much more amplified, associated with the life conditions these children come from, this is likely to be a major challenge to address in our government school system. It must be mentioned here, however uncomfortable we may feel about it, that the prejudices, I would like to call it as the social pandemic, that seek to associate a particular religion to the spread of COVID-19 is one in which many among the people like us have also been tested positive. There is no reason to believe that teachers and other functionaries in government school system will have any special immunity to this social pandemic. This, more than anything else, is going to corrode the very core of the value systems that government schools are built on. One shudders to think as to how this is going to pan out in the everyday life in our government schools for years to come. These are not prophecies. These are only some of the likely scenarios. There is a necessity to highlight these in whichever forums we have access to. At least cognizing these possibilities will enable us to find ways of preventing these from actualizing to its full pathology. It is important for us to find ways and means to prevent these from actually happening and weakening the already fragile system of public school education. The Delhi government has an important role to play in anticipating some of these possible scenarios and preparing themselves to address these adequately. A renewed campaign in community awareness for the need to continue to send children to school and to ensure that they are not withdrawn from school is necessary. Equally necessary would be an intense sensitization among teachers on matters related to Equally necessary would be an intense sensitization among teachers on matters related to their possible prejudices and for ensuring emotional and holding and backstopping, particularly for those children who are from vulnerable home backgrounds. I understand that the Minister of Education of Delhi addresses parents and teachers periodically for promoting certain items on the government's educational agenda. It is perhaps necessary for him to use those effective communication channels as well as the instrument of mentor teachers to attempt to create awareness and sensitivity among the school community. Like all state governments, the government of Delhi is also going through a major financial crunch. It is quite likely that this may spill over to school education as well. The civil society needs to keep their advocacy on with full intensity to ensure that further impoverishment of public school education does not happen, particularly at a time when we need to strengthen the public education system all the more. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say as my initial remark, and I hope there will be an interaction based on this.
Okay, thank you, Professor Menon, for your
Thank you,
thoughtful speech.